Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Pierre Brutus. I am a senior counsel at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I lead the Institute's reparations work, and I am the convener of the New Jersey Reparations Council. Welcome all of you to the fifth public session of the New Jersey Reparations Council, hosted by the Public Safety and Justice Committee. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Press is in attendance to listen only. Closed captioning is available for anyone who needs it. Just hit the button. In the first part of this session, the committee will discuss their work on public safety and justice. And in the second half of the session will be the public comment portion. This is the fifth of 9 public sessions of the council. The council's first in-person public event will be held on Juneteenth, Wednesday, June 19, and will be held at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And the council will discuss their work to date. It'll be moderated by the New Yorker staff writer, journalist, and historian Jelani Cobb. Please be on the lookout for publicity materials for that. And it will also be available on live stream. You can go to njreparationscouncil.org to find out more information, as well as to view previous public sessions. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to our partner, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, for making the New Jersey Reparations Council possible. You will hear from our partner, Sharif Braxton, the community officer, shortly. You will hear from the committee members, and you will also hear from our council co-chairs, Tashinia Henderson and Khalil Gibran Muhammad. Afterwards, we will open up to the public comment portion for that as well. The question we often confront doing the work here is, why convene the New Jersey Reparations Council? And the answer to that question is that although slavery shaped every aspect of New Jersey, too many people in our state believe that it never happened here and that racial inequality is not even an issue in New Jersey. But as you will hear tonight, New Jersey's original sin of slavery and its lasting stain will tell a very different story. Co-chaired by Khalil Gibran Muhammad and Dean Tashinia Henderson, and comprised of local, state, and national experts, the New Jersey Reparations Council is finally confronting and working to repair their enduring harm from New Jersey's deep and often overlooked institution of slavery and enduring impact on the contemporary life of Black people in our state. Because these inequalities have been reinforced by generations of policy design rooted in slavery and not by individual behaviors, they must be repaired by design. The council will not only propose bold strategic policies to repair their enduring harm to Black people from slavery, but it will also answer this foundational question, and that is, what kind of reparative systems does New Jersey need to build for Black people to finally be free, to thrive, free to win? Our affirmative vision is for the council to think boldly and imaginatively and to propose solutions that address the varied and manifold harms of slavery, and also to address the structural racism at the core through reparative policies and investments that are commensurate and proportional to the enduring harm from slavery. On Juneteenth, 2025, the council will produce a report drawing direct connections between New Jersey's history and its present, and propose comprehensive policy recommendations that will not only serve as a blueprint for how New Jersey can repair the harms from slavery, but also act as a vast resource to the New Jersey Reparations Task Force that New Jersey will ultimately create through law, thanks to the ongoing advocacy of our faith allies for reparations partners. As we look ahead to the council's work, it is both thrilling and, to be sure, daunting, but we know the only way forward to build a new New Jersey is through. We are convinced that every movement for racial justice requires fierce and independent advocates to lift their voices when others won't. We are also convinced that New Jersey Reparations Council, building on a decades-long fight in this state, will help to move this issue of reparations from unsafe, unpalatable, and impossible to inevitable and good sense. And we thank you for standing with us. I am now pleased to pass the mic to Sharif Braxton, Community Officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. And good evening, everyone. I'm Sharif Braxton, and I'm the Community Officer with the New Jersey Department at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. My colleagues and I are steadfastly committed to achieving health equity in New Jersey, which means that everyone who calls our state home has a fair and just opportunity to live their healthiest life possible. Yet, the current reality is that there are large, persistent, and increasing gaps in opportunities for health and well-being across neighborhoods and communities, depending on who you are and where you live. In 2021, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention declared racism a public health issue, affecting the health and well-being of millions of people directly. As the nation's largest philanthropy dedicated to health, we deeply believe in dismantling structural racism and the barriers that millions face every day, simply because of their race or their intersectionality with other groups that experience oppression. And as a funder of the Council, the Foundation is clear in our stance. The time has come for New Jersey to create a shared understanding of the harms caused to Black New Jerseyans over the past 4 centuries and to embark on a process to remedy these injustices. We all have a collective responsibility and the ability to achieve health equity by striving for racial equity and treating the root causes of disparities. To do this right requires a great deal of research, planning, and public dialogue. Since 2021, the Foundation has worked to better understand the global landscape of the reparations movement, and now the Foundation is funding the Council to serve as the leading edge of efforts to convene a non-governmental process to initiate the necessary work. We see the Council's work as a critical precursor to achieving the justice that our governments owe to Black New Jerseyans. Together, we have an opportunity to set a national example by addressing structural racism in a thoughtful and comprehensive manner. Our commitment to do so is rooted in our dedication to health, equity, and justice. My colleagues and I are proud to be on this journey and eager to engage in the hard work that it requires. And I'm also excited about the crucial discussions we'll have this evening. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Jean-Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharif. Prior to introducing Dean Tajania Henderson, I would like to give a brief sensitivity warning. This conversation will describe and detail patterns of specific instances of racism, racial violence, and racially discriminatory criminal legal system practices. This will be a heavy conversation, and it is absolutely necessary as part of our work to develop recommendations to repair the harm perpetuated against Black people historically and presently. I would now like to introduce one of the 2 co-chairs of the New Jersey Reparations Council, Dean Tajania Henderson. Tajania Henderson serves as the Dean of the Graduate School at Rutgers University, Newark, where she's also a professor at Rutgers Law School. Her scholarship focuses on the historical impact of punishment regimes on property systems in the US, and she is particularly interested in the legal histories of incarceration and chattel slavery. Please welcome Dean Tajania Henderson.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre. I was excited. I think I jumped in prematurely, so my apologies for that. It is a pleasure to be here. I have said this before, and I'll say it again. The engagement that this council has with members of our public, with the state's citizenry, are the most critical parts of this work. And without this engagement with all of you, this work is not possible. We don't go from, what did you call it, Jean-Pierre, from impossible to inevitable without widespread public support and engagement and investment in this effort. And so I just want to thank folks for being here and let you know how important it is to us to hear from you and to also share with you the work that these committees are doing. It is my pleasure to be here this evening with the Public Safety and Justice Committee. This committee is like many of these committees. I'm just like blown away by the folks and their experiences on this committee, and so I'm just going to introduce them in a second. But before I do, I want to sort of give folks a sense. As Jean-Pierre mentioned, this is the fifth public meeting of the Reparations Council, and this is the Reparations Council in New Jersey. It's the first of its kind commission to confront and repair the state's deep and often overlooked involvement in American chattel slavery and its lasting impact on the contemporary lives of Black people in our state. Our conversation today will offer us an opportunity to examine the state's deep and often overlooked involvement in the criminal legal system, and particularly the ensnaring and trapping and cattling of people of African descent in that system here in New Jersey, and how folks are being treated and what has happened over time. And I think this will be a really productive conversation. This committee's charge is to examine how policing in New Jersey and in the US more broadly is broken. It is not broken by accident, it is broken by design. This committee examines the history of policing and incarceration in the state, going as far back as the records will allow us to go, and how policing and state power has been used to oppress Black people, Black communities, and limit the options and futures of Black lives. This committee also examines over-policing and how over-policing and engagement with the criminal justice system affects contemporary Black life, particularly in destabilizing families and hamstringing economic opportunity. This committee is also charged with investigating how and why New Jersey has some of the worst racial disparities in the nation when it comes to incarcerating young people here in the state. And this committee is also studying how mass incarceration and other key aspects of the criminal justice and criminal legal system have detrimentally impacted New Jersey's communities, all of New Jersey's communities, and led to additional social costs that are being borne by all of us to this day. We have this fantastic committee here, which I am honored to introduce. Our first of our committee co-directors is Alexis Carteron. Alexis is professor of clinical law and directs the Civil Rights in the Criminal Legal System Clinic at NYU School of Law. The clinic handles cases and matters addressing a range of issues, including the rights of incarcerated people and others under community supervision, as well as racially biased police practices. I'm just going to put a shout out in here for Alexis that up until last year, she was on the faculty at Rutgers Law School. And so we also claim Alexis Carteron. Alexis previously worked as an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, as well as the New York Civil Liberties Union, where she served as lead counsel in one of the cases challenging the NYPD stop and frisk practices. Our other star committee co-director is Jason Williamson. Jason serves as executive director of the Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law at NYU. Prior to that, he served as deputy director of the ACLU's Criminal Law Reform Project. There, he was focused primarily on Fourth Amendment cases. These are sort of unlawful searches and seizures, as well as police practices cases and public defense reform. Jason Williamson began his legal career in New Orleans immediately following Hurricane Katrina, first as a staff attorney for the Juvenile Justice Project there in Louisiana, and later as a staff attorney and founding member of the Juvenile Regional Services, which is now the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, which provided legal representation for indigent young people there in Orleans Parish Juvenile Court. Our next committee member is Jerry Harris, who is a two-time graduate of Rutgers University. In his time at Rutgers, Jerry was one of the organizers of the 1969 Black student protest. He also authored the proposal that ultimately secured what would become known as the Black House there on Bartlett Street, and later became the Paul Robeson Cultural Center. When he was a graduate student, he served as an assistant to the dean at Livingston College. He also served as one of the founders and the president of the Rutgers African American Alumni Alliance. Since graduating, Jerry has had a more than 50-year career as a public administrator, educator, and social justice advocate. He's a former chief operating officer of the Shiloh Community Development Corp, was a business administrator and director of the Department of Housing and Economic Development for the city of Trenton, served as director of the Urban and Public Policy Institute there at Rowan, and also was assistant secretary of state and assistant state treasurer for the state of New Jersey. Jerry served as co-founder and chairman emeritus of the New Jersey Black Issues Convention, a strategic alliance of organizations here in the state promoting the unity, survival, and progress of Black people. Our next representative is Amal Sinha. Amal is a nationally recognized civil rights leader who's dedicated his career to advancing racial justice, holding institutions accountable, and promoting and defending rights and liberties. Amal serves as executive director of the ACLU of New Jersey, where he leads a team of dedicated professionals and guides the organization's advocacy work, its litigation strategy, its policy strategy, as well as its public education campaigns to help build a more just society. And last but certainly not least is Bethany Young. Bethany is a lawyer, a researcher, and a policy expert who studies social stratification and its adverse impacts on individuals in academic, professional, and legal settings. She previously worked at the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama and at the Center for Death Penalty Litigation in North Carolina, where she provided representation on capital appeals and pushed policymakers to reconsider the use and overuse of the death penalty. Bethany has also led community organizations and discussions around racial and economic inequality, and has also created resources to help with public education and engagement around the history of racial injustice in this country, including efforts to remove Confederate monuments in cities throughout the nation. She has also been leading local and multi-state criminal justice research and public policy projects to help improve public safety. It is a pleasure to work with this committee and to have them here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. To help us sort of get started, I know we're starting with sort of a broad overview, and my first question is for you, Jason. How is this committee planning to address the myriad ways in which the criminal legal system has specifically caused harm to Black people and communities in New Jersey? It feels like a broad mandate. And so we're eager to hear how the committee is sort of strategizing around how to address these issues that in some cases feel intractable.
Thank you so much, Tajania. Broad mandate is an understatement for sure, but so grateful to be a part of this effort. Thank you to you for your leadership in this space, to Jean-Pierre, the Institute, all the folks at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for all of their support as well. Alexis and I and all of the committee members are really honored to be a part of this effort, as overwhelming as it may seem or may feel. I'm going to answer your question. And I think as part of that, I just want to say a little bit about what we're hoping to get from this session as a committee. I know the different public sessions have operated a little bit differently, so I just want to give folks a sense of what to expect. As you mentioned, Tajania, we want to give everyone kind of an overview of what we've been thinking about, discussing, researching. And part of the challenge for us is to figure out among all of the many different directions and nuances and things that are involved here, which things to focus on in our written report that will contribute to the larger document that will be presented next year. And so we're grappling with a lot of questions and are really eager to get as much feedback and input from members of the public as possible. We do appreciate being considered experts in some sense in the field, but we want to just acknowledge that the true experts really are the folks who are being impacted by the criminal legal system every day. And we are not here to kind of dictate to all of you what this conversation should be about or what the focus of our report should be. We'll give you a sense of what we're thinking, but really want to hear from you because your perspectives are really the most important. So don't hold back. We need your expertise and your thoughtfulness as we move through all of this. So to start to answer your question more directly, Tajania, I think we're trying to do this in a way that is both chronological, but also makes sense intuitively to people as they think about the through line from slavery in New Jersey, which, as everyone has mentioned, was a very real thing here, no matter what folks may want to pretend. And I think that will become clear once we all finish doing our work. And so we're going to start, the plan is to start with laying out kind of a history of the many harms that have been generated by the criminal legal system in this state. As you said, we're going to go back as far as possible, and I'll touch on a few of the things that some of our research has found already. We'll move from there to trying to break down how that harm shows up in the present day, which is to say that much of what happened during slavery and in the immediate aftermath in terms of the development of the criminal legal system can be traced directly to what we're seeing now and the disproportionate impact that all of it is having on Black and Brown communities. So we want to be clear about the fact that this history that we're talking about, even going back to colonial times, shows up even today. We want to then, though, spend a good deal of our time both in the report and I think in our discussions talk about addressing that harm. And I think this is where we really want to get as much feedback as possible. I mean, we want feedback on all of it, but as we start to think about both how Black people can and should be compensated for all this harm, also thinking about how to recreate or reimagine the institutions that created that harm in the first place so that going forward, we can do something different and create institutions that will allow, as Jean-Pierre said at the beginning, Black people to truly be free and to thrive in this state. And so we'll be talking about things that range from traditional reforms of the current system all the way to kind of abolitionist principles, non-reformist reforms, for those of you who are familiar with that language. But basically, what are things that can be fixed and what are things that need to just be torn down and rebuilt differently. So Tajania, you mentioned in terms of the kind of specific topics that we're trying to or planning to cover. I just want to note here that we could go in many, many different directions, even within policing, for example. And so we're going to have to make some hard choices about where to focus our energy. But broadly speaking, we want to focus on three things. One is policing/law enforcement and its development as a tool of social control of Black people in this country. And again, drawing a direct connection between what was happening during slavery and in the immediate aftermath to what's happening right now. Two, mass incarceration and the development of the carceral system in New Jersey, and in particular, looking at excessive sentencing as kind of an indicator and something that has had a disproportionate impact, not only on Black people in this state, but on entire neighborhoods and communities. And then we also want to talk a bit about probation and parole, or the probation and parole regime in New Jersey and its development. I know that Alexis will speak to a bit of that next, but just thinking about that as another form of, while it's non-carceral, form of social control by the state that, again, continues to be perpetuated in harmful ways in 2024. I want to acknowledge, though, that none of that is touching on juvenile justice, for example, or on bail practices and all of the things connected to that debate, to prosecutorial misconduct, all sorts of bad actors and bad acts that have occurred within our system that are worth exploring, but that we're just grappling with how to incorporate given the amount of space we have and the amount of time that we have. So again, really want to hear from folks if there are things that you think we're missing or should be addressing that we're not. Just to say a couple of things about this first piece of our report in terms of the history of harm. First of all, I want to thank Laisa Alexis, who I'm not sure is on the call today, who is one of our researchers who's just been doing an incredible job helping us to unearth whatever we can find to try to figure out what that through line looks like. We've also been in contact with Reverend Charles Boyer, who many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, and all of the work that he's done throughout the state, and Professor Leslie Alexander, who we spoke with recently, who is a member of the History Committee, who has provided some really helpful guidance to us as well. Again, talking about the historical connections between what was happening during slavery and what's happening now. One of the things, for example, that Professor Alexander shared with us, and I think this has been confirmed by some of the preliminary research that Laisa has done, is that many of the laws and slave codes that were developed in New Jersey going back to the 1700s were really designed specifically to prevent two things: revolt and escape, right? And so all of the laws were written in a way to discourage any notion of pushing back against the system. And interestingly, a lot of those laws also look to enlist other members of the public, white members of the public, to join in the effort to control Black population in this country and to make sure that they were doing their duty, so to speak, to keep the state or the colony at that time safe. We also know that the Fugitive Slave Act, which was passed in the mid-1800s, operated in New Jersey as it did in every other state. And so we're doing some research into how that manifested and the ways in which state and local officials in New Jersey contributed to efforts to apprehend formerly enslaved Africans who were seeking their freedom. We want to spend some time talking about the development of the criminal code in this state, and in particular, the use of low-level crimes that were essentially created to target Black and Brown communities. We know that there's at least one report that Laisa unearthed that as of 1930, the vast majority of the arrests for disorderly conduct, public drunkenness, and any sort of motor vehicle violations were disproportionately, the vast majority of those arrests were of Black people. And again, that is, of course, not by accident. We also know that the first state prison in New Jersey was built in 1798 and was quickly followed by a series of laws that were passed that enabled officials to send enslaved Africans who misbehaved to workhouses to punish them for that misbehavior and to send them a message about what the consequences would be if it happened again. We also saw very quickly that there were a lot of financial incentives tied to the development of the prison system in New Jersey, and that prison labor generally became a central part of the way that the carceral system worked and continues to work in this state. I mentioned excessive sentencing as well. I'll just say, and by excessive sentencing, we mean in particular the administration of the death penalty, life without parole, and harsh sex offender registries and sentences, all of which have had a disproportionate impact on Black people in this state over time. And again, I want to reiterate that that impact is not only limited to the individuals who were convicted and imprisoned, but also to the communities that they come from, and the economic impact that has, not to mention the effect that that has on families and our ability to function in a healthy way as a community. Couple other stats I'll note, just to be clear that none of this is new or accidental. As of the mid-1930s, Black people were 25% of the prison population, despite being a much smaller percentage. I believe the percentage at that point was in single digits in terms of the total population. And from 1933 to 1938, that percentage went up to almost 31% of the prison population in just that short time. And we saw a similar jump in the number of Black male juveniles who were sent to juvenile facilities during that same period in the mid to late 1930s. So it's not a surprise that all of this continues to this day. And again, our hope is that we can illustrate this in a way that then leads into a conversation about how to fix it all. And, you know, it is clear that this is about more than just writing a check to folks, that and while that may be part of what needs to happen, that there are some, at least with respect to the criminal legal system, some systemic inequities and aspects of our system that have to be transformed as part of this process of providing reparations to our communities. So I'll leave it there. As I said, I know that Alexis will say a bit about the probation and parole piece, and then we'll pass it to the rest of our committee members.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you mentioning and really, I think, elevating the penal history of New Jersey and why that history is so salient for this conversation and also for this committee. Folks don't often recognize that New Jersey opened, or the state prison in Trenton was the third, I think, prison in the nation. So when prisons begin, they're beginning here. This is a forerunner of prisons and what a state prison will look like and how people will be oppressed and subjugated within the walls of a state institution intended to punish them for some sort of conduct. So when you have places like Kentucky, which I think opens in 1801 or late 1800, you have Virginia, they're looking at the example of New York's prison, of Eastern State in Philadelphia, Walnut Street in Philadelphia. They're looking at the Trenton prison. They're looking at these northern states as models for how the southern states, who have different concerns, ought to construct their facilities, what they should be thinking about, and what types of measures they should put in place to continue to control specifically Black bodies and poor bodies, right? Because that's what prisons have been for and continue to be for dark bodies and for poor bodies.
And also, Tanzania, they learned how to profit off of these institutions, right?
Yes.
And creative ways to make the state some money in the process.
Yes, yes. And if they could put bodies into that machine, they were willing to do it. So how can we keep people occupied in ways and then make money off of them and farm them out to other people to make money off of them? It begins in the North. This begins in the North. It does not begin in Louisiana. It does not begin in South Carolina. It begins up here. And our unwillingness to really confront that history, I think it has blinded us to possibilities more than anything else, unfortunately. So thank you for that. I'm glad that was one of my notes. So thank you. My next question is for Alexis Carteron. Alexis, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit. I know Jason mentioned this, but why is community supervision important to a conversation about reparations? And are there similarities between community supervision and other forms of subjugation, bondage, sentencing, control in the state's criminal legal system?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Community supervision, parole and probation are topics I spend a lot of time thinking about. And we tend to think of them as programs that are, an act of grace, somebody getting off easy, somebody perhaps avoiding time in jail or prison. But they are actually really hard programs to get through. They really perpetrate significant harm on quite a lot of people who are enrolled in them. And so that's why it's going to be part of the charge of the committee to look at the development of those programs in New Jersey and interrogate and investigate whether there are connections between probation and parole as they're carried out today in New Jersey and the history of slavery in New Jersey. Um, and I guess I want to start by saying that we talk a lot about mass incarceration, for people who are lovers of justice and people who care about social justice. Mass incarceration is a term that kind of just rolls off the tongue. A lot of people will talk about that. But we also need to think about ourselves as living in an age of mass supervision. And so I thought tonight I would share a little bit of background on the programs and their history. And to be perfectly frank with you all, we have, some homework to do to make sure that we really understand the details about how these programs unfolded and were developed in New Jersey. But I'll kind of tell a little bit of a national story and then offer some data on how this is functioning in New Jersey today. So probation was first developed in Massachusetts. The first recorded example was in 1830. And the basic idea behind probation is that a person, a criminal defendant, who is subject to a case is getting a sentence of probation where they're subject to conditions instead of going to jail or prison. So again, going back to this idea that when you're on probation, you're getting kind of a good deal and maybe even one that you should be really happy about, because the default is that you would be serving a term of incarceration or detention. And so probation continued to grow throughout the United States from its initial use in Massachusetts in 1830. And by 1925, it was widespread. It was in every state in the United States. And kind of similarly, parole developed, again, echoing what Tajani just said about these things unfolding in the North. Parole in the United States was first used at the Elmira Reformatory in New York, in the kind of prison setting. Interestingly, we've also learned during our research that the first concept of parole actually unfolded during the Civil War, which of course has lots of implications for the kind of work that we're interested in on the committee, when prisoners of war could promise that they would not rejoin hostilities. And so the term parole was also used in the United States around then. And the basic idea is that someone who is granted parole is getting their freedom from prison in exchange for a promise of good behavior. And this became very common throughout the United States in the 20th century at a time when indeterminate prison sentences were common. So what is an indeterminate prison sentence? It's a prison sentence that's something like 20 years to life, 35 years to life. You know that you'll be going to prison for some minimum amount of time, but you really don't know when you're going to get out. And so today in the United States, we have about 4 million people who are on probation and parole, and we have about 2 million people who are in jail and prison, and it's been that way for a number of years. So the number of people who are subjected to this form of supervision really dwarfs the number of people who are actually incarcerated. And the same is true in New Jersey. And in fact, the disparity is even more stark in New Jersey. Some of the more recent data from a couple years ago, there were about 12,800 people incarcerated in New Jersey state prison system, but there were 10 times as many on probation or parole. 12,000 people in prison and 128,000 people on probation or parole. And the size of that probation and parole population is pretty striking considering that New York, right next door, had only 123,000 people on parole at the same time. So New Jersey is certainly making great use of probation and parole to this day. So what does the reality of that look like? If you're on probation or parole, you're subject to a standard set of conditions and sometimes special conditions that can be added on by your parole or probation officer. And these conditions are really a very clear pathway to surveillance and police contact and police oversight, and law enforcement contact and oversight. So some of the standard conditions, your parole or probation officer will have authority to enter your home, to conduct searches. You have to show up for regular meetings with your parole or probation officer. Your parole or probation officer might conduct random visits of your home, of your workplace, of your school. You're supposed to avoid arrest and criminal charges. You're subject to random drug and alcohol testing. You're required to maintain a job or attend school. You must receive permission to travel or to leave the state. And again, it's important to keep in mind what this really means for people. And, I want to be clear, some people don't find it to be that bad. But there is some surveillance that's really inherent in this. The notion that an officer of the state could show up at your home or your work at any time, that's really not normal. That's really not typical in the United States. But we have a very high number of people in New Jersey who are subject to that and have been subject to that for a very long time. I also want to echo something that Jason mentioned when he was talking about the impact of incarceration on families. I think the same could be said about probation or parole, that it's not just the person who's on probation or parole who feels it. If you live with someone who's on probation or parole, your home too could be subject to search for very little reason. And of course, the penalty for violating one of these conditions, whether it's a minor one, like maybe breaking curfew, or a more serious one, for really any one of those violations, you can be sent to jail or prison. So in the probation context, if you start out kind of thinking you're getting a deal because you're getting probation, it doesn't mean that jail or prison are off the table entirely. They're still hanging over your head. And the same is true for parole, that you've been in prison for some time, you've gotten out of prison on parole, but the possibility of being returned to prison is real. And given the major racial disproportionality that exists in New Jersey's criminal legal system, we know that these burdens continue to fall disproportionately on Black New Jerseyans as well. So the work of the committee in the coming months is to investigate and interrogate the development of these systems in New Jersey, to look at how they grew, particularly in the years after the Civil War when slavery was abolished, and uncover the links, to the extent they exist, between slavery and policing and the patrolling of Black bodies through this system. I can easily anticipate us finding strong connections between the lives of enslaved people and the kind of surveillance that they were subjected to, and the kind of surveillance that people continue to live under through these systems. So I will leave it there for now.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you said at the very end, that we expect to find connections. This is not a stretch to say that the types of sort of relentless, never-ending surveillance that people under community supervision are subjected to is reminiscent and probably draws some of its features and elements from another system of bondage and another system of subjugation. That's not a stretch. And we're doing that research now. And I'm so excited about what the committee is finding and what we are able to share with folks from some of that archival research. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
The next question is for Jerry Harris. And this is really a question about sort of foundational to the work. And that is, why is understanding mass incarceration central to the work of this Reparations Council or any reparations initiative in this country?
Thank you so much for that question. And in thinking about this work, I was, I'm dating myself here, thrown back to an article that I read in Ebony magazine in 1962. A quote from Frederick Douglass, quoted by Lerone Bennett, saying that slavery has been fruitful in giving itself names. It has been called the peculiar institution, the social system, and the impediment. It has been called by a great many names, and it will call itself yet another name. And you and I had better wait and see what new form this old monster will assume, and in what skin the old snake will come forth in. 48 years later, reading Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow, we see her saying that the system of mass incarceration that has evolved, particularly as a result of the war on drugs is the replacement to that old social system of slavery and Jim Crow. As a consequence, the work that we're doing is connecting the dots, recognizing that the Black community's experience is experiencing legal discrimination based on that system. We see it in employment and housing and voting. And our job in terms of identifying reparative actions and potential investments cut across that. So our work, I think, is fundamental to many of the areas, intersectional with the areas of the other elements of the commission. Mass incarceration, as we see it now, doesn't only refer to the criminal justice system as has been talked about by my colleagues, but also the larger web of laws, rules, policies, and customs that control those labeled as criminal, both those that are in prison and those that are not in prison. That includes our families and our communities. It's interesting to note, and there's been already some discussion and some of the research that's going on. We're tracking the rates of incarceration. Already mentioned that in 1930, Black folks constituted 25% of the folks who were incarcerated. Well, in 2003, when the first New Jersey Corrections and Summit Committee and Summit was held under Cookie Rivera's leadership, and I hope Cookie's online today, 64% of all those in prison in New Jersey were Black. Those numbers have gone down now. Most recently, we know that I think the last report said 59%, but it's still New Jersey has stands number one in the ratio of Black to white disproportionality in imprisonment. So what does that really mean? And we're looking, I think, in the challenge here is that the comprehensive impact of mass incarceration, the system of social control that has its roots in slavery, it's evolved through Jim Crow and now to mass incarceration, does have economic impact. But because we're also talking about public safety, to a certain extent, those disparities actually make our communities less safe. Not only the Black community, but all communities. So the work of the Sentencing Project presents, I think, an interesting possibility for us to take a look at, particularly the last report where it talked about the economic disparities, the impact of low to no salaries for individuals who are incarcerated, that the fact that criminal convictions create a lifelong barrier to securing employment and housing, as we've already talked about, but also the high cost of maintaining this system of mass incarceration diverts money from things that could truly be, in fact, impactful on public safety and the quality of life in our community. Recently, I discovered, and I must admit, because I am not an academic and I'm not a lawyer, but tend more to be involved in trying to think about advocacy work. I came across the book by Tassali Bakay called Stolen Wealth, Hidden Power, and the Case for Reparations for Mass Incarceration. She identifies several very, very, very important harms that I'd like to highlight. And I think that perhaps I'd like to hear from those folks who are online about whether or not these resonate to them. One, she suggests one harm is that children of color have been criminalized and deprived of many of the essentials of a healthy childhood. Again, denying people's freedom and future. Individuals have served with legally imposed sentences, disproportionately Black men, have been saddled with harsh extra-legal punishments in the form of enduring physical, social, and economic deprivation and debility. In essence, although in New Jersey, we were successful in returning the voting rights to 80 individuals who had been on probation and parole, the culture still prevents them from voting. We need to address that. The oversized apparatus of punishment has been sustained in part by uncompensated and heavily controlled labor and resources of adult family members of prisoners, disproportionately women. Here, one of the things that we should, I think, look at in terms of repair and investment is the price paid by the women in our community who are connected to incarcerated people. Also, the reality that substantial numbers of the incarcerated now increasingly are women. Fourth, she identifies the children of incarcerated parents have lost not only parents' presence, but pivotal and early forms of social and educational opportunity. Here, a link to education. And finally, she talks about urban communities that represent the geographic epicenters of mass incarceration. We know that in New Jersey, 77% of those incarcerated come from 11 communities, 14% of them from Newark. These numbers all suggest the possibility and the need for us to delve deeply into mass incarceration, its current harms, and we look forward to hearing from those of you further help define and refine what you think are the most important areas for us to focus on.
Thank you so much for that and for expanding our conversation into some of these other areas that may not be on folks' radar. When we're talking about the damage that over policing, over surveillance, the damage and the harm caused by mass incarceration and disparate sentencing, those harms extend beyond the individual. They extend to the family and they extend to the progeny, right? And they extend to the community. So you can see a direct line from large numbers of people being incarcerated to there being less wealth to pass to children, right? You talk about wealth transfer, people who have been incarcerated don't have the ability to do wealth transfer. So we have to think about this broadly. And it's an economic problem, it's a public health problem, it's a political problem, it's a democracy problem, and all of this is part of the work of this committee. So thank you so much for sort of broadening our lens so we can really think, and the work of bringing in the work of other scholars so we can really think about what this means and how we might engage around possibilities for reparative work, right? That repairing work in this context. Thank you so much.
Indeed.
I am really excited for us to hear from one of our other committee members. This is Bethany Young. I know we've talked a lot about sort of the back end of mass incarceration, but I'm hoping you can talk a bit about the front end, sort of how this starts. How do we see the legacy of slavery and racism and racial violence showing up in policing here in New Jersey?
Yes, and thank you for that lead in, Tajania. As Jason has described at the top of the meeting, and as everyone has referenced, the objective of controlling and suppressing Black people was foundational to early policing in New Jersey and across the country. I'm going to talk a little bit about the recent history and present landscape of racism in policing in New Jersey. So I'm going to kind of go back a couple decades in New Jersey to the 1980s and 1990s, where the state saw heightened scrutiny over law enforcement, racism, and abusive tactics. Many argue that what happened in New Jersey really set the stage for racial profiling litigation in the country. Some might say that the happenings in New Jersey actually brought the term racial profiling to national attention. And by no means am I saying that racism in policing began in New Jersey in the 80s. We know that it's been around a long time. It's not new. What I'm referring to is modern racial profiling. And what I mean by that is a set of tactics and criteria that are codified and systematized through informal and informal mechanisms like training and law enforcement policies that encourage targeting Black people as though they are more likely to engage in criminal behavior, particularly related to illegal drug trafficking. And that's how it manifested in New Jersey in the 80s and 90s. So this phenomenon, which is not phenomenal and not new, came to a head in New Jersey in the New Jersey versus Soto case. And that was a case involving 17 Black people who were challenging arrests that they argued were the result of discriminatory policing. In that case, to assess the claims that were made, the judge commissioned a study to determine whether state troopers engaged in racial profiling, a fact which many Black New Jersey residents knew already to be true. So Temple University researcher Dr. John Lambert showed that while all drivers could be stopped, and let me back up for a minute, they kind of studied enforcement patterns on New Jersey Turnpike. So Dr. Lambert showed that while all drivers could be stopped, it was Black drivers who police stopped at a disproportionately high rate, considering their lesser presence on the turnpike. Dr. Lambert found that the odds of a mismatch happening by chance were substantially less than 1 in 1 billion. So it's not accidental, as we all know and as we talked about today. He concluded that absent some other explanation for the dramatically disproportionate number of stops of Black drivers, it would appear that the race of the occupants and/or drivers of the car is a decisive factor or a factor with great explanatory power. So in a nutshell, the state troopers were conducting selective enforcement targeting Black drivers. The judge ruled in line with those findings that the state police had engaged in racially selective enforcement in 1996. Calls for increased scrutiny of state police heightened in 1998 when troopers fired at least 11 shots into a van of Black and Latino men during a traffic stop for speeding. The then Attorney General was investigating the violent encounter, and it led him to mandate an analysis of the state troopers' practices. Among other things, the Attorney General found that while only 24% of the stops involved Black drivers, and only 0.7, so less than 1% of all traffic stops involved searches, Black people accounted for more than half of those searches. The study also found that while only 19% of searches resulted in subsequent arrests or seizures of illegal items, 62% of that small portion of total searches were attributed to Black drivers. So the study concluded by the then New Jersey Attorney General concluded that troopers disproportionately subjected Black drivers to consent searches, and that troopers deliberately entered false information about the driver's race to conceal their tactics. As a result of all of this and more, in 1999, New Jersey became entered into one of the first comprehensive consent decrees with the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, following these incidents, and overwhelming data supporting reports of egregious racial profiling by New Jersey State Police. The consent decree ended in 2009, but we know racial discriminatory policing did not end with that consent decree. To the point, the Force Report, a 16-month investigation by New Jersey Advanced Media, details every reported incident of force from 2012 to 2016, which is the most recent available data. And it covers the state's 468 local police departments, as well as the state police. Among other troubling trends, the analysis found that across New Jersey, Black people were more than 3 times as likely to face police force than white people. In some local jurisdictions, the disparities were even worse. To close on our remarks, I'm going to read one of the use of force incidents that are detailed in this report. According to court records, Bridgerton officers went to a 43-year-old Black woman's house to charge her with contempt for violating a no-contact order. A diabetic, the woman asked to finish eating before she left, according to the lawsuit, which was filed in federal court. One of the officers was instructed to take the woman's plate away. According to the lawsuit, when she reached for a glass of orange juice, the officer grabbed her by the arm and bent it behind her back. The 2 officers drove her to the floor. The officer said that the woman was resisting arrest by refusing to put her hands behind her back. She said she could not comply because she had a frozen shoulder from an old injury and asked officers to cuff her in front. Instead, according to the lawsuit, officers punched her in the face, kicked her, pulled her hair, banged her head against the floor, and pepper sprayed her. The woman said she suffered neck and shoulder injuries and psychological distress. She filed a lawsuit, as I mentioned. 2 years later, with her lawsuit pending, the same 2 officers and a third stopped the woman on a residential road. She refused to open her car door and called 911, so officers attempted to break her passenger side window. The officers pulled her from the vehicle and wrestled her to the ground as she screamed about her injured arm, according to video and court records. She amended her suit to include the new incident, and in 2016, she settled with the city. The claims against the officers were dismissed, and the city did not admit wrongdoing. We know that there are scores of untold stories over the years, and that the physical and psychological harm and the indignity of this experience in the system for many people is widespread, collective, enduring. And I am aware of the gravity of this work and our work in this committee to talk about how do we repair that harm.
Thank you so much, Bethany, and thank you for sharing those examples. I think it's worth reminding folks that this is a negligible sample. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of cases that have been filed against municipalities and police departments in New Jersey for exactly this kind of conduct: excessive force, unreasonable search, unlawful seizure, all of this. And the predicate for these cases is racial discrimination and differential racial treatment. And I think it's heavy. It's heavy. And I appreciate you talking about that. Sort of, how do we think about repair when this seems to be never ending? The list is longer than we can imagine, and then there are the harms and the negative police encounters that never make it to a lawsuit, that never make it to public scrutiny. How do we account for that, and how do we literally take account of it, right? When people are ashamed to talk about an experience that they may have had with law enforcement, or that has been covered and shielded from scrutiny. And so people feel like, what's the benefit of talking about this other than reliving and reigniting their own trauma? So thank you for sharing that, and for getting us thinking really about how traumatic this can be on the policing side, and how people's experiences with law enforcement can lead to the kind of damage that is incalculable, because it sort of repeats itself. It doesn't go away. It's propagates itself, and folks don't have an opportunity to experience real peace. It's also a reminder, sort of, if you put together your remarks with what Alexis was talking about with community supervision, when law enforcement officials can behave in this way and have no accountability, rarely have to stand accountable for their actions, can move from municipality to municipality, often with impunity. When you have that kind of a system, that means that the people who are on community supervision, who can't say no, are even more vulnerable to violence and even more vulnerable to harm, because those are folks who are unable to refuse. The refusal of a search can lead to revocation of that parole or revocation of probation. And now they're going back inside because they tried to refuse a search that wasn't appropriate. There's no refusal. And so when you have that sort of, unsavory behavior colliding with the expansive reach of community supervision, you really have more increasingly large groups of folks who have no recourse. And our law enforcement officials know that they don't have any recourse. And there are documented instances of law enforcement officers engaging in hypersurveillance of certain people that they know to be under community supervision, because they know that there is no recourse for those folks, and they can engage in some of this negative behavior, negative conduct, without any reprisal. So I really appreciate you talking about that. Thank you very much. I see Amal is here. Hello, Amal. Amal, I was chatting with your colleagues. I wasn't sure who I was going to talk to today. So thank you so much. It's great to see you. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about really the work of organizations like the ACLU in amplifying some of these concerns, and also in documenting some of these cases, sort of getting that documentation and the groundwork for accountability done for the rest of us. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure thing. Thank you so much for the question. You know, I was a little late because I was just giving a talk on some of the work that we've been doing on decarceration. So I'm grateful to be here, first of all, and let me just say I'm so proud to be a part of this committee that's doing truly impactful work and starting a much needed conversation on reparations. You know, as we've heard today, as you've heard today, because I just joined, but as you've heard today, is one of the greatest harms that our criminal legal system has caused in the past and continues to cause in the present is an over reliance on incarceration. So a lot of the work that we're doing at the ACLU of New Jersey is documenting that, you know, figuring out how to address it, and identifying legal, policy, community, and other solutions to help address some of the harms that have been burdening Black and other communities of color over the past generations. And so one of the things that we've recognized is that in New Jersey, we're not immune from what's happening at the national level, right? And what we're seeing is that arrest, detention, prosecution, and prison all seem to be instinctive, right? It's the same tough on crime narratives that we're seeing all across the country, and that have gotten us to the point of over incarceration that we're currently experiencing. And public safety narratives, I know that our committee is called Public Safety and Justice. Public safety narratives often insist on that tough on crime rhetoric and policymaking to justify incarcerating Black communities. And in order to truly repair, I think we need to start talking about the issue differently. And that's why at the ACLU, for many years, we've been prioritizing decarceration as our frame, right? Decarceration is our frame for addressing criminal legal harms. By decarceration, of course, we mean reducing the prison population, but it doesn't stop there, right? That's the end goal, I suppose, but it's not just like a raw, let's reduce the prison population. It is a strategic, let's reduce the prison population so that we can get to the heart and the root cause of the issue. So we mean reducing the prison population, but we also mean reimagining systems to be more reparative and just. We mean utilizing decarcerative tools like the constitutional power of clemency. We mean ending mandatory minimums and extreme sentences. We mean utilizing a public health rather than a criminal approach to drug use and decriminalizing possession of all drugs. We mean ensuring that police are not our only response to societal discomfort. So I'm very proud to be a lifelong New Jerseyan for many reasons. And one of them is because every once in a while, we get to do some pretty transformational stuff as a state. And I'm proud that New Jersey, thanks to the work of the collective work of the ACLU and many of our partners, some of whom are here on this Zoom today, I'm proud that we've led a reduction of our prison population that's historic. We've reduced our prison population by a percentage that's greater than any other state in recent years. And indeed, we've reduced our prison population by more than 50% since 2011. And we have one of the lowest rates of incarceration in the country. And I should say that crime in every major category is down. So we've proven that we can be leaders and that safety and liberty are not at odds with one another, as so many will have you think. No, the truth is that indeed we can be both safe and free. And so to explain further and to talk about a couple of the issues that I've mentioned, I'm going to invite my colleagues who are really the true subject matter experts on some of these issues. First up, I want to invite our senior staff attorney for decarceration, Rebecca Uwakwe, followed by Director of Supreme Court Advocacy, Alex Shalom. So Rebecca, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Amol. And hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here. I know I see some familiar faces, and for those that I don't know, thank you. It's nice to meet you all. I'm so happy to be having this discussion, this well-needed discussion. So first, I mean, I want to, before diving into the topic, for those that don't know, I've been a public defender in Brooklyn for over a decade before joining the ACLU. So fighting for racial justice is always at the center of what I do and what we are doing at the ACLU. So as we know, racial bias seeps into the cracks and crevices of the criminal legal system. And when it seeps into it, it festers. And we know that it festers in the role of policing, in the role of prosecution, and in sentencing. And so if we do nothing about it, then the damage will continue. And we will continue to send Black people to prison 12 times higher than the rate of white people. So doing nothing is not an option. And we know that. That's why we're all here today. So action is required at every single level of government to address systemic injustices. And that's why we have the Clemency Project at the ACLU. So we're looking at the executive level, we're looking at the governor, and we're asking the governor and other executive authorities who have the power to grant clemency, who have the power to grant pardons and commutations. We're asking them to address the systemic injustices that occur in our criminal legal system. Now, many of you know that in New Jersey, clemency is highly underutilized. How do we know? We haven't heard. There isn't anything in the news, right? Governor Murphy hasn't granted any petitions for pardons or commutations. There's a serious backlog right now. And from 1994, in fact, to present day, so that's going back 30 years. In the past 3 decades, there's only been 105 petitions for clemency granted. That's it. And that is unacceptable. Now, when you look at the nation and you look at other trends across the nation, other states are actually practicing clemency. So this is not, this is something that Amol has mentioned. It is historical, it's constitutional, it's something that our forefathers have been practicing, right? It's embedded in our Constitution, but it's just not practiced enough in New Jersey. So when we look at other states, we can see that other states, for example, in 2019, the governor in Illinois, Governor Pritzker, he pardoned 11,000 people for low-level marijuana convictions. And after that, we've seen Governor Tom Wolf in Pennsylvania in 2021. He commuted sentences for felony murder. All right, and that's a big deal because I want to focus on commutations for a second and I'll come back to it. And another thing, in 2022, we saw a champion of clemency in the state of Oregon with Governor Brown. She granted 47,000 pardons for marijuana offenses, 47,000. And in addition to that, she granted 1,148 commutations. And that included 144 people that were charged with violent offenses, including murder. I want to pause here for a second because usually when we talk about clemency and when you hear clemency, you know, a lot of people, they refer to pardons, and pardons are, they're crucial, right? Because that is how people are getting back to their full citizenship status, right? That's how people are able to vote. That's how people are able to get housing. That's how people are able to get the resources that they need. We know that pardons are important. They are necessary. But our project focuses on commutations because we also know that there is a crisis of mass incarceration. I know we've been talking about it all evening, right? But we also know that we need to continue to reduce the prison population and address the excessive sentences and the systemic injustices that are occurring. So let me just back up. Some of the systemic injustices that occur result, as we know, in excessive sentences. Now, our project we look at two groups. So we're asking the governor to approach clemency in a categorical way. So we want broad strokes. So we're moving away from an individual case-by-case basis. Clemency is more than just an act of mercy. It is an opportunity, is a tool to correct injustices, to correct failed policies, to correct the war on drugs, to correct policies that we know are a result of fear-mongering, that we know do not help our community, that we know are causing damage and harm to our communities. So we can't, I just gave you all these numbers from all these other states, but we cannot just look at, oh, there's just one act of mercy where it's just a handful of people that are getting granted pardons or commutations. We are looking at this in a larger scale. So it's called categorical clemency. So categorical clemency looks at the broad scale. It looks at groups of people, and it says what groups have suffered an injustice. What groups can we say, you know what, we actually need to shine a microscope here. We need to shine some light here and figure out, wait, what can we do to fix this? So by advocating for clemency, we're asking Governor Murphy from the top to look at these issues and address them by granting clemency for groups of people. And so the two groups, I don't want to take up too much time, but the two groups that we're addressing right now are survivors of domestic violence who attacked their abusers and people that are impacted by extreme trial penalties. And those are people who decided to go to trial, reject a prosecution's offer. They decided to exercise their Sixth Amendment right to go to trial. And instead, after trial, they were sentenced to something like double, triple, or even quadruple the prosecution's offer. So those are the two categories that we're looking at, because there's no reason why someone who has been suffering abuse for their entire life since childhood and who decided to exercise self-defense and attack their abuser and ended up killing their abuser, there's no reason why someone should be doing 30 years to life in prison. There's no reason why someone should be doing substantially more time in prison because they decided to exercise their Sixth Amendment right to go to trial. So we're looking at those two categories, but I also want to highlight this tool that we have that we're not using in New Jersey, right? This clemency tool, right? So, and to use it on a larger scale, this categorical scale, we're not using it. And so that's really what we're advocating for. That's what we're pushing for. That is what is behind the Clemency Project. So I just wanted to, take this moment.
This is fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca. Because
you.
I think what you're doing is you're really shining a light on practices that most people don't even know is happening.
Right.
In New Jersey and all over the country. If you reject a plea deal, if you are convicted after rejecting a plea deal, you are most often going to receive what folks call a trial penalty. The prosecutor's office is penalizing you for going to trial. You have a constitutional right to a trial, but they will penalize you and will ask the judge to issue more time, a lengthier sentence than the sentence that they offered if you had not gone to trial. So this is like, a way really, I think, to help people understand how certain common practices in the criminal legal system lead to people having sentences that make no sense and that are not justifiable other than prosecutorial punishment, right? A prosecutor is angry with you and is trying to make you pay for what you did when you said, I have a right to go to trial, so I'm going to go to trial, right? That's what the 30 years to life is about. It's about you saying, I want to go to trial. It's not about what you did, because earlier they were willing to offer you 10, but post conviction, now they want to offer you now the only thing that they're willing to consider is 30 to life. This is happening every day around the country. People are not paying enough attention to it. And when we're talking about lengthy sentences for crimes that don't really make a lot of sense, this is often what's happening is people are getting this trial penalty. So thank you so much for elevating that and elevating the idea of something like categorical clemency, which I think when we are thinking about reparative tools, there are tools that we already have in our tool belt, tools that are already in the kit that we could be using, that we could be exercising, that we have opted not to because it's not seen as politically safe. And what you're I think raising for us is the possibility of thinking about why we believe that this is justified in the face of the harms that these folks are facing. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.
No, of course. Next up, we have Alex Shalom. Alex, please. We see you're outside under the stars. I feel like, to what do we owe the pleasure of being under the stars this evening?
So I wanted to apologize for being out here, but this is actually a small act of racial reparation because I'm coaching my town's diverse softball team, and we're playing Milburn, New Jersey. So if we beat Milburn, it feels like it is reparations in a sense. But I'm trying to multitask here and both coach the team, though I've taken a little break from coaching, and tell you, put some kind of meat on the bones of what Tajania and Rebecca were just talking about, which are these extreme trial penalties. So I want to just tell you a story and tell you a little bit about what we've done. So the story is about James Comer. I met James 12 years ago or so. He grew up in Newark, about 5 miles from where I grew up in Montclair. He's 5 years younger than me exactly. And yet we couldn't have lived further apart from one another. Our lives couldn't have been more different. When James was 17, he had not really gotten in much trouble other than, this and that, marijuana sorts of little things. But when he was 17, a 21-year-old cousin and a 17-year-old friend and he went on a robbery spree. They held 4 different people up at gunpoint around Essex County. And in one of the robberies, someone other than James, everyone agrees, someone other than James, either the cousin or the friend, shot and killed one of them. They were arrested 12 hours later or so, and they were charged with robbery and with murder. So, Amal and Rebecca were talking about some of the times people go to prison for things that don't cause harm. This isn't one of those cases. Everyone agrees that murder causes social harm. Robbery causes social harm. But what happened is he was 17. They looked at the case. They made him a plea offer. They offered him 20 years, of which he would have to do 17. So a very long sentence, especially for a 17-year-old. And James did what 17-year-olds are wont to do, which is he made an impetuous decision, a poorly reasoned decision. And so notwithstanding the fact that he didn't have a particularly strong trial defense, he went to trial. And as often happens in these cases, the person who made the best decision was the 21-year-old. He testified against both of the 17-year-olds and got a very favorable plea resolution. James was convicted at trial of robbery and of felony murder, again, even though he wasn't the trigger man. And at sentencing, the judge said, "I find nothing particularly mitigating in your background." Gave him the minimum sentence on the murder, which is 30 years, of which he must do 30 years. And on each of the robberies, he gave him the mid-range sentence of 15 years and said, and now I have to decide whether to run these sentences concurrently or consecutively, all together or one after the other, and decided to run them consecutively. So what that meant for James was that his aggregate sentence was 75 years, 68 3/4 without parole. And so for those of you who, like me, are not gifted at math, let me cut to the chase. It meant James was going to die in prison. It meant that for a first offense committed as a child, he had been condemned to die in prison. And so we challenged that sentence in, I think, 2013. Amal, you can correct me if it was 2014, but it was a long time. It was, about 10 years ago. And we argued that it was a de facto life without parole sentence and that he was entitled under Supreme Court precedent to a new sentence because that was the functional equivalent of life. And the court agreed, and he got a new sentence. And we had a new sentencing hearing. And just getting back to what Tajania and Rebecca were talking about, at the new sentencing hearing, the prosecutor insisted that the only just sentence would be 75 years. because, well, that's what he had gotten last time. And he went to trial. I said, but you offered him 17. He said, right. But he went to trial. Anyway, the judge gave him the then minimum sentence of 30 years. And we again appealed. And we went to the Supreme Court and we said, listen, when someone commits a crime as a 17, they haven't yet matured. And we have to give them a chance to see if the person they are at 37, at 47, at 42, at whatever, is different than the person they were at 17. I know I'm a different person than I was at 17, and other people are entitled to make that showing. And in what is one of our best pieces of litigation law, the court agreed. The court agreed that any young person who gets a sentence of 30 years or more is entitled after 20 years to make a showing that they have been rehabilitated, that they have changed, that they're a different person now than they were then. And we were able to do that in James's case, present evidence, and the judge again reduced his sentence. And so he'll be getting out in about 18 months. And it's great. And it's a step forward, and it gives him a chance at a life. And there are about 100 other people in our community who now have the same opportunity, who can make that showing. But it's only right now, all the law has done is provided that for people who committed their crimes when they were under 18. But the brain science doesn't say, well, if you committed a crime at 18, then you should be condemned to spend the rest of your life in prison. But 17, no. I mean, in the same way, we don't pretend to think that people actually magically become mature at 18. And so one of the things that we're working on at the ACLU is trying to get the court to recognize the importance of second chances, the importance of showing redemption, showing maturation, not just for people who committed their crimes as children, but also for people who committed their crimes as older adolescents, as 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and so on. And so that's the kind of next stage of the fight. And I think an important reparative step in correcting the harms that have so deeply infected our criminal legal system.
Thank you for that, Alex. And we can't thank you enough for joining us from the diamond, from the softball diamond.
I am sorry for how I'm dressed, but I'm going to get back to yelling at 14-year-olds with much gratitude for everything that's being done.
We won't yell at them too loud. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. This has really been a great opportunity, I think, for us to elevate some practices that maybe people aren't super familiar with, and also to give us a chance to think, to sort of go back in time and to think about imagining a better future. And so I'm really excited about what will be possible and what this committee will be able to do, and recognizing that, as we started, the mandate is broad. The mandate is broad, and the committee is limited in time. But what we know is there is work happening in New Jersey that is helping us to elevate some of these disparities, some of this conduct, helping us to elevate some of these systems and systemic problems. And we can highlight those efforts, and we can amplify those voices in collaboration, such that this committee is not attempting to do everything in that broad mandate, and can sort of bring in other voices. So thank you to our colleagues at the ACLU for doing exactly that tonight. And, we all want to live in communities. We all want to live in families that are safe, that are healthy. And it's not too much to ask that for all of our children, to have an opportunity to live somewhere where it's safe, an opportunity to live somewhere that's healthy. And our willingness to throw people away in the ways that both Rebecca and Alex were describing is impeding our ability to live safely and to live healthily. And it's impeding our children's ability to do the same. And so I'm glad that we are opening up possibilities for what we can do. Things like categorical clemency, things like, sort of pushing back on excessive trial penalties, and really insisting that the day before you turn 18 is not somehow the last day that ought to be considered for your brain development. If you turned 18 on a Tuesday, Monday was not the day Monday night your brain didn't change. So the idea that somehow turning 18 would change you and make you more culpable is one that we can all agree is not realistic and ought to be subject to some real scrutiny. It's my pleasure to introduce to folks who haven't yet had a chance to meet the other co-chair of the New Jersey Reparations Council, Khalil Gibran Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad is a professor, I think a Ford Foundation professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. And it is my pleasure to do this work with him and to learn from him and to learn from his work. He's the author of Condemnation of Blackness and has published broadly on criminal justice issues, on public safety, on all of these practices that we've been talking about today and others. And so I'm super excited to have Khalil here. So we're like tag teaming today for the first time. So it's exciting, and take it away.
Hi, Tajania. Thanks so much. And I really appreciate working with you on the task force, and to all the folks who have joined us from the Public Safety Committee. I saw Alexis last night, and we working on justice in another context. So really grateful for being in this community. I apologize. I'm actually in my classroom. I teach from 4:30 to 7:15-ish. And so I just finished teaching. So pardon being late to the public session. So I want to do three things. I want to offer a brief historical context, which I think may have happened in some context, but I certainly want to offer my 2 cents. I want to offer some evidence from the National Academy of Sciences that I think helped to bolster this work. And then I want to offer a brief comparison to some research that Vera Institute of Justice was engaged in, looking at various punishment practices in Western European countries. So to begin, my particular expertise is on the history of racial criminalization. And what I mean by that is that criminalization is the ascription of collective guilt to a group of people, regardless of individual behavior. And it's an important concept because it is a common tool of exploitation and oppression of various peoples around the world, both multiple groups of people, demographic populations here in the United States and globally. It is a key tool that states have used to disqualify people from the full fruits of their citizenship, their labor, their property, many ways in which societies organize hierarchically. And in the United States, the reason why this is an important historical point to emphasize in a conversation about reparations is because there is no moment in American history where anti-Black racism hasn't depended upon the ascription of collective guilt of Black people. Despite the Constitution's guarantee of due process, of individual defense, and the presumption of innocence, these are not rights that Black people gained in the beginning, and they are rights that Black people still struggle to hold today. And I think if we hold that in place, a conversation about reparations ultimately must understand the centrality of the ascription of criminality to Black people as one of the most common, durable, and enduring ways in which our rights and privileges have been extracted and harms have accumulated over centuries. I also just want to emphasize that no pathway to scaling back the harms of this system exists without a fundamental reimagining of safety, and particularly a downsizing, I'm going to use a new word today, downsizing of the footprint of law enforcement. There is just no way that that tool, as it was imagined, as it exists historically, and as it is trained to do today, can deliver justice in a reparative framework. And so I just want to be crystal clear that This is not only a view rooted in history and the present, it is also a perspective that the National Academies of Sciences articulated in a report published in November of 2022. A report, the lights have just gone down on me. Hold on a second. I think I'm not moving enough in here.
Dr. Muhammad, did the power go out at Harvard?
It-
Is that
it
Harvard didn't
did.
pay its light bill?
Well, there's a lot that has gone out here at Harvard. It ain't just the lights. So the National Academy of the Sciences, in its 2022 report, a consensus study entitled Reducing Racial Inequality in Crime and Justice, for the first time in the Academy's history, centered racial inequality as the independent variable under investigation. Whereas previous National Academies of Sciences reports looked at the causes and consequences of mass incarceration, a 2014 report that I participated in as a consensus study, a more recent report on proactive policing, and numerous studies over the past 40 years have looked at various themes around policing and incarceration. None of them looked specifically at the role of the criminal justice system as itself a cause of racial inequality. And that's an important and timely intervention to establish a national perspective on the increasing attention that policymakers and advocates like the ACLU have called us to address in the ways in which this system itself is the very instrument of the various inequalities in labor markets, in housing markets, in terms of income and wealth. And the direction of causality in this case, we often think that poor people are therefore more inclined to crime. And I should say that has been part of the criminalization logic that has existed in this country. So let me back off of the we. Whereas in this case, this report is an authoritative understanding that the system itself is an exacerbator of these various inequalities. The National Academies also took seriously for the first time that solutions to racial inequality in the system must come from outside the system, that there are very few pathways to closing those disparities that don't turn on economic and social conditions that many of us on this call, and certainly the committee itself, understand as very much part of the various kinds of inequalities that make people more vulnerable to either community violence writ large or to over-policing. And so I just want to lift up a couple of the ways in which the report uses such language to identify some of the social drivers that I think are relevant in the larger conversations that we're having with regard to reparations. And so when we think about social drivers, not social drivers, when we think about the ways in which changing economic situations outside of the criminal justice system, the report calls explicitly for improving economic opportunities, for developing health strategies, including Medicaid expansion, community-based health services, high-quality early childhood education programs, alongside other forms of long-term investments in the well-being of communities. The very notion of safety and well-being substituting criminal justice responses is becoming a cornerstone in policy decision-making about how to ultimately reduce the footprint of the criminal legal system as we understand it today. So those are a few examples. Others are more practical, and I think, again, for our committee work, these are important at least to name in terms of how research is pointing in the direction. The greening of communities, particularly in transforming vacant lots in terms of community gardens, the relighting of places where darkness often is a function of municipal neglect, are not the kinds of sexy things that give us a sense of true justice. But for the academy, our proven mechanisms of creating the conditions for greater well-being in communities that I think we have to take seriously in the context of the work that the task force is engaging. I also just want to say that on the issue of law enforcement, which again, none of these changes can proceed at scale until we solve for the relationship and role of policing in exacerbating and creating the conditions of inequality and systemic and structural racism. The report does offer examples of both community-driven safety, which to some degree takes the form of what many of us are already invested in or interested in, which are CVI strategies, which amount to violence interruption, and it comes in different forms, with police, without police, and then mixed versions of these things. Because I missed the earlier part of the meeting, I'm not quite sure how much we talked about these things. The Biden administration has made certain commitments and investments, but we can do a whole lot more. And I know that some of this work is already happening on the ground in Newark under the administration of Ras Baraka. So I mentioned the NAS report as an invitation to the public to download the report. It's free for downloading, and to look at some of the recommendations in the report for a deeper and richer analysis at the national level for the kinds of things that are, at this point are not really debatable in terms of identifying the problem, addressing its historical roots, and then considering some of the policy solutions that can help to reduce the footprint of the criminal legal system. The last thing that I said I would mention is the work of the Vera Institute that I've been part of as a board member to draw attention to the ways in which many European countries simply treat the range of social problems that individuals have and engage in with each other that look very, very differently than our own. In 2015, I visited about 8 German prisons, and these prisons range from places that housed 18 to 24-year-olds in minimal security environments to maximum security prisons built over 100 years ago. It's also important to note that in Germany, about 1/3 of the incarcerated population would be the equivalent of our minoritized population, non-German, mostly foreign-born young men from neighboring countries, some of which are of African descent, but many of them are from eastern parts of Europe or from Turkey to the south. And that's important because the racial dynamics within the German context are not identical to our own, but there are clearly people who are racialized in that society and who are in their prisons. And there are a couple of just very clear takeaways that I think ought to guide the way that we think about reparations in the US context. First, the German Constitution was obviously rewritten in the wake of World War II and has been revised multiple times. But at the heart of the German Constitution is a federal system of incarceration, of punishment, I should say, that at the heart of it guarantees human dignity, insists and ensures that the state cannot be responsible for denigrating human life. As a consequence of that, the Constitution provides for a level of training of everyone in the system, particularly in the prison system for corrections facilities, that make our training systems look like a weekend boot camp as compared to a 2-year degree. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but to emphasize that training is fundamental to their system. Why? Because every corrections officer functions as a social worker inside of a German prison. They are responsible for attending to the therapeutic needs with an actual trained social psychologist. They don't do that function, but they work alongside to make sure that every single individual can take responsibility for their guilt, if in fact they are guilty. Let's just assume that most people are in fact guilty of the thing. It's just they don't deserve to be in prison for 30 years for it. And therefore, they take responsibility for individual therapeutic intervention. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means that the average prison length up to and including murder is about 2.5 years. It means that the corrections officer's job is to not only support the return, or what they call resocialization, of individuals back to the community as soon as possible, and to approximate the conditions of confinement that are most like outside to ensure that their adjustment to their return is as smooth as possible. It's a remarkable commitment to the individual repairing through the deprivation of liberty, not torture, their ultimate return back to society in an effort to ensure that society is better off for the entire punishment experience, not worse off, which is what happens in our case. The last thing I'll say about this example is that the basis for these commitments of resocialization and human dignity and individual therapeutic intervention for those who are in fact confined to prison or some form of detention in the German case is rooted in a historical reckoning with the Nazi period. Everything about the way that this system functions has taken the situation of the Nazis and turned it inside out to ensure that no part of the German state resembles the ways in which the Nazis weaponized the criminal justice system to commit the violations of human life in the context of the Holocaust. And the great irony of their system is that many American state policymakers wrote that Constitution waving or wagging their finger at the Germans for what occurred during the Holocaust and ensuring, essentially, under the occupation of America's military presence in Germany, which is still there, that they would not repeat those harms again. We have never reckoned with, nor admitted, nor come to terms with what has happened in this country. And thus, it continues to this very day. And so that is another reminder of how essential the history is in this effort at achieving reparations, both in New Jersey and in this country. Back to you, Tajania.
Thank you so much. I was trying to unmute. Thank you. Thank you for that and for that reminder. We really appreciate this perspective and really giving us a transnational lens into different models for repairing harm and for reckoning with the works of ourselves. So thank you so much for that perspective. I'm turning it over to Jean-Pierre, who is going to sort of set us up for the next phase of the public meeting. I just want to thank the folks who are watching us on YouTube, on the streaming. I'm always sort of checking to see if folks are in there and if they're engaging. So I just want to thank folks for participating and for chiming in and keeping us accountable. So thank you all for the folks who are able to join us via that method. Jean-Pierre.
Thank you so much, Tajania. First, I just want to give a big thank you to the Public Safety and Justice Committee. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentations, for your insights. But I also want to give a very, very, very big thank you for the masterful job of moderating that Dean Tajania has provided us with us and the insights that she gave us. And also to Professor Mohammed for the wonderful presentation, for adding historical and international context to the discussion as well. And before we just move on to the public comment portion, I just want to say briefly, particularly to Jerry's point about the way in which slavery sort of reproduces itself in different manifestations across the history of the United States. And I just want to cite Newark's own Amir Baraka and his notion of the changing same. Part of the point of reparations is to repair the harms. And so often, particularly around policing, and not just the police, but policing around surveillance, and we think policing more expansively, is that Black people have found themselves all too often in very similar positions across history when it comes to policing, particularly policing as a way of reproducing race as a kind of regime. And if we think about what the purpose of reparations is about, to Khalil's point about shifting the very constitution of German society, then the purpose of reparations, particularly in the United States, is to end this kind of cycle. We should not find ourselves talking about the very same kinds of conditions if we actually implement reparations properly in New Jersey and in the United States. So I just want to point out that one of the key tenets of reparations is a cessation of harms, right? Ending, the kind of harms that we've seen over and over again, in part to reproduce racial inequality. So I just wanted to lift that up. In moving on to the public comment portion, this is now time for the committee to hear from those of you who have registered. I know the committee looks forward to your comments and having your comments inform their work going forward. Thanks to those of you who have previously submitted comments via the website. We appreciate it. For those of you that are unaware, you can go to njreparationscouncil.org to submit comments, not only to the Public Safety and Justice Committee, but to all the committees, and you are not limited by 3 minutes of time. You can express yourself in multiple manifestations. So if you want to express yourself more artistically or with video or audio or even with handwritten notes, you can do so. As previously pointed out in the flyer, those of you who have previously registered to speak will be allowed to speak. But our committee has stated that they would like for those of you who are in the Zoom room who have not signed up to speak but are interested, they would like to hear from you as well. So if you are currently in the Zoom room and you have not registered to speak, you can. And the way to let us know that you're interested in speaking, please use the raise your hand function on the Zoom. You should look down at the bottom of your screen. You should see the area where it says reactions. You can click on the raise hand. Please click on that if you are in the Zoom room, you have not registered to speak, but you would like to. Please raise your hand so that we can call on you if you are interested. Now, you will be limited to 3 minutes. There will be a timer on the upper right of the screen. It will be green. I will give you a 15-second warning. I will give you a 10-second grace period on the other side of the 3 minutes, and we will mute you after that. If you're unable to get you this evening, that's okay. Once again, you can use the website. And as an important disclaimer, I just want to point out that we're not going to tolerate any hate speech, personal attacks, or threats of any kind, and you will be promptly removed from this meeting. I will now pass it over to the committee's co-directors, Alexis and Jason, who will call on folks to speak.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for those of you in the Zoom room who have stuck with us. We're approaching the 2-hour mark, but really glad to see so many people who are still here and actively listening. So the first person I wanted to invite to speak, if he would like to, is Larry Ham, the chair of the People's Organization for Progress, an organization familiar to many, many, many in the Zoom room, and I'm sure are watching. So Larry, if you would like to share some thoughts, we welcome them. Okay, maybe this is not the right moment for that. That's fine. So then I think we will move on to next on the list is Damon Sharuka Venable. Damon, if you'd like to speak, you have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Wow. First of all, thank you, Alexis. I'm really honored to be in a panel such as this. And I just want to say, I was incarcerated at the age of 16. I'm from New Jersey. I was incarcerated at the age of 16, and I spent 35 years in prison, right? And I remember in the early 90s reading books by Khalil Gibran and things of this nature. So I'm just just so happy to be on a panel such as this, dealing with, this incredible issue, right? That, still to this day, since 40 acres in a mule have not been resolved, right? And so with respect to me, I did 35 years in prison. I'm still on lifetime parole, right? Why is that? And so just to give you all a background, and in no way, shape, or form, my opinions represents the office of the Office of the Public Defenders, right? of which I work for. I'm the community affairs and policy specialist. I'm in upper management, right? So I'm on the top tier level. I work with lawyers and, the biggest law firm in the state of New Jersey that's doing some really, really good work on criminal justice reform and everything. But here it is, this one-time young Black man who committed a serious crime, did 35 years, can't get off lifetime parole. And if any of you, and I think most of you are aware that, just tracking the history from chattel slavery up until now, systems of oppression, are hell-bent on controlling, restricting, surveilling, Black and brown bodies, right? And so every day that I wake up, I've been home, I will be home on May 4th, 3 years. And I've done everything, above and beyond what is asked of me. I am a community defender. I work for a state agency. I'm doing, some miraculous things. I've been found to be rehabilitated and everything. Still can't get off lifetime parole. Why is that? It's because of the socio-historical reality of America that feels that it has to restrict, control, and surveil the Black body. And so reparations must address this issue in some form or fashion. I don't want no money. I will forego my money, because for me, reparations is not about money. Reparations is about attaining complete freedom and autonomy. So I'm not going to get, my time is up, but thank you. It was more of a commentary than a question. Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time to be here. Really grateful for you sharing your perspective with us, and your thoughts. I can't tell you how much we on the committee are looking to hear from people exactly like you. Sorry that you had to spend so much time behind bars, but so glad you're out now and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with all of us tonight. So thank you, Sharuka. Jason, do you want to call in next speaker?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks again to Damon for his thoughts. Our next speaker is Linda Carter. Linda, you have the floor.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Now, I think we're on it. All right. I am an attorney and a legacy resident of the city of Newark. And so, I want to thank you for this, but I have a couple of concerns. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to bullet point stuff, and anything else I'll submit. First, I'm a little concerned about the term public safety, because policing has never been a safe piece for Black people in this country. So I'm concerned with the title. The other thing, I have a list here. When Jason was speaking, I was looking forward to, and he didn't cover, but hopefully you guys think about it, the Second Amendment and the role of the Second Amendment in policing, particularly because it was designed to protect white people against indigenous people and Black people. The other thing is that something for you to consider is LBJ, President Johnson, and how in the middle of providing money for model cities, which Jerome Harris probably knows, he was also increasing the number of police, and he was increasing the budgets of police around the country at that time after the rebellions of the 60s. A couple of things for purposes of the committee, I heard somebody sort of mention it, to think about the fact that young Black men in particular don't mature until age 26. And that has a bearing on, and I've heard some of the conversation, I think, from Jason in terms of their ages and how they should be treated. Let me see what else. Oh, that New Jersey legislator, as a remedy, I think the New Jersey legislature removed the term juvenile through all legislation. It should be children, minors, adolescents, but not juveniles, because that's a very, that term suggests that somebody has done something and they haven't even been convicted yet. So I think the term juvenile needs to be replaced throughout all legislation with terms that are more appropriate for young people, depending upon their age. If they're teenagers, or they're 19, or they're 12, I don't think juvenile is an appropriate term to be used. It's very accusatory. I would suggest that part of the curriculum in the schools be to review the business and economics of incarceration, that be included in the curriculum of high schools from 9th grade to 12th grade, to give people an idea, particularly the public and particularly young people, to give them an idea of how much money is being made off individuals as sort of a deterrence, but at least give them the facts. I was glad that Dame actually had an opportunity to speak. I think that more people in the reentry should be involved in the process. There is an organization called Returning Citizens with Altariq Witcher and Chino Ortiz. I don't know that they've been connected, but they've been doing reentry and they started in prison. So it'd be a good idea to reach out to them. I'm a little concerned about the term reform. I think it should be transformation. Reform sort of says maintain the status quo with a different name. And I'm also concerned with the term slavery. It seems to make it easier for people to avoid the fact that we were property. And the last thing is that I lived in a community where we didn't see police in 1968 here in the city of Newark. And because we used a lot of cultural techniques that were passed down from people who were sharecroppers, some who fled the Ku Klux Klan. And I think we should look at some cultural solutions to addressing conflict in our community. And I think that I went through everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, I just want to respond really quickly to say I completely agree with you about Returning Citizen Support Group and other similar groups being involved. We did give them a heads up about this happening tonight, and we're going to try to continue to make efforts to connect with them.
Thank you.
And I would add also, Linda, that I appreciate all of your comments around our language. I think language is important, and the words that we use and the way that we're communicating all this is part of the process. So thank you for highlighting that, and we will be thoughtful about how we are referring to some of these terms and things so that we're giving people the right impression.
Yeah, I could just walk over to Ms. Henderson's office and hand her the list.
I accept it. I accept it, Linda Carter. Thank you.
I'll be there. Take care.
So I don't see any other hands for the moment. Anyone want to raise a hand and offer some comments? Alicia Hubbard, who I know, and I'll use my moderator's privilege to ask directly. Do you want to offer some comments? If you don't, that's fine, of course.
It looks
Robin
like
Spencer.
Robin Spencer has got a hand up. Robin?
Yes, I was waiting for someone to, good evening. I'm sorry. My name is Robin Spencer. I'm an educator out of Essex County. I was listening to Professor Muhammad, do the historical context of Germany, but it's unfortunate that you have to be at this level to get a historical context. Is there a way, or has anyone started addressing the educational component and not necessarily waiting until the high school level? Because as a high school educator, it is harder at the high school level to get a buy-in to things that are already ingrained in us, all right? Because if you're talking about any type of social justice and policy, we're in the system before we get to high school. So education in some way of public safety, I know we don't want to use the word quote unquote discipline, but that should be incorporated in the educational system some way, somehow, before we get to high school, if possible. Have you guys looked at that as an entry point?
So, I mean, I would just note that, I think all of the work that the various committees are doing is connected in a lot of ways. And so, we're not looking at education specifically, but I agree with you 100% that at least with respect to the criminal legal system and all of the ways in which it is harming our communities, some of it, sadly, our kids already know from their everyday experience. But I think digging into, as you mentioned, kind of digging into, what do we compare this to and what's going on in other places? I think we absolutely need to do that as soon as possible in the classroom. And I don't think it's an accident that it doesn't happen, right? This country is not about critical thinking, never has been. So I think that's part of the shift that has to happen more broadly, and certainly as it relates to what we're talking about here tonight. But Alexis, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, I don't think so. I think that covers it. Thank you. As a parent of an elementary school student, it's very well taken. So thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Can I offer a comment, Alexis and Jason?
Of course.
Great. I just want to say that to Robin's point, the city of Chicago settled a police torture case related to the violent abuse of a couple of hundred Black men in the 70s and 80s. That case was settled in 2015. And to your point, part of the settlement, which is the first reparations case explicitly related to police brutality, part of the settlement was to design a curriculum that would be taught in elementary school that would use the story of what happened as a baseline for greater accountability amongst future citizens of the city of Chicago, or the citizens, but future voting citizens, so that they would have a stake in a kind of expectation that the police are ultimately to be held accountable for its behavior and that they have ownership on that. And so the case itself is part of the citywide curriculum, and just a model, I think, for exactly what you're asking this committee to consider. So thank you for that suggestion.
Anyone else interested in offering some comments? I don't see hands at the moment, but anyone should feel free to help me out and tell me that there is a hand that I don't see.
And I'll just reiterate that we do encourage folks to submit comments or thoughts or questions or whatever may be going through your mind. We want to consider all of it. So even if there's nothing that comes to mind today, I see Susan Esquilin. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but Susan, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, I just want I'm a psychologist, and I have worked over the years, many years, in issues related with the child welfare system, and the interface between child welfare and the incarceration system is enormous. I mean, it really, the damage to the kids from the separation and disruption of the family, and it makes these kids then end up often in the carceral system themselves. And I just feel like that whole issue about what's happened with child welfare and parents being incarcerated needs to be looked at. I don't know if this is the right committee, but it's hugely damaging, and I think that needs to be addressed. So that's all I want to say.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think it's the connections between the child welfare system, or the family policing system, as some have termed it, and the criminal legal system are undeniable and seem to be getting a lot more attention and a lot more traction these days. I think for this committee, it is not an issue that we have focused on directly, but it's certainly something that we will take back to the committee and consider, and also see if there's any other committee that's part of the council that has been looking at that. So thank you. Jason, if you want to add anything, of course, feel free.
No, that sounds right to me. And yeah, I look forward to, finding ways for us to marry a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here with much of the research and work that the other committees are doing. Because again, all of this is of a piece in many ways. So I appreciate the comment and the suggestion.
Any additional comments? Erica Walker? you're on mute, but you have 3 minutes or more than 3 minutes if you need it. Thank you.
Peace and power. First and foremost, I wanted to say thank you so much for hosting this. As soon as I got the email, blasted it out, put it in our newsletter. The Chief of Staff Ward of Councilman Gilmore in Jersey City. I have a marketing background, and this working for Councilman Gilmore's office has been my introduction to politics. And after 2.5 years working in city government, one of the things that I've noticed is a major lack of marketing and promotion. We spend a lot of money, we get a lot of grants, we have a lot of programs, but they're not well attended because we don't market them properly. So I say this so that we can also make sure we have that in the back of our minds or in the front when we're also thinking about language, that we're also making sure that there is a budget to promote these new laws, these new rights, our new prerogatives, our so that people know to take advantage of it. Because a lot of times we fight so hard to get these resources, to get these programs, but the people who need them most don't know they exist, and they don't have access to the means to fill out the paperwork, to fill out the forms online. And when they do, it's just not enough time to get all their information together. So I love all the education and knowledge that's being shared, but we just want to make sure that there's a way to get it to the people who need it most and need that assistance in filling out that paperwork and getting access to all of these great resources and rights that we're fighting for. So with that said, I'm also willing to help in any way when it comes to marketing consultation. I used to work for CBS, iHeartRadio, Cox Media, so I'm willing to share my specialties for this cause.
Thanks so much for that, Erica. I really appreciate it.
And I relinquish the rest of my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Also, be careful what you volunteer for, because we're looking for as much help as possible. So hope you don't regret it.
No, I'm here for it. That's I actually, if I may, I came back to Jersey City to use my skill set for my home base. I was born and raised in Jersey City, saw the strong movement in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta for 10 years, got inspired. I met Max Parthas in South Carolina with the abolitionist movement. And like I said in the chat, I was watching on YouTube earlier, a lot of what was said today reminds me of that abolitionist movement we're fighting for the same autonomy. And so I'm on board. So yes, this is what I'm here for. So I volunteer.
Thank you so much. Anyone else want to jump in? Okay, Dean Henderson, do I turn it back to you now, or Jean-Pierre?
Yeah, thank you, Alexis. What I do want to say is I want to thank you, all of you who provided public comment, I think particularly spontaneously, who didn't even register to speak previously, particularly because I think that reflects how much you connected with the presentations from our various speakers. So once again, I just want to thank the panelists and everyone who spoke today for making your comments accessible and for creating an environment for folks to provide public comment. I just want to reiterate what Alexis and Jason had raised, that they really do want to hear from you all. So this is not a one-time thing. This is not the end, but this is an ongoing dialogue. So for those of you who spoke today, please be on the lookout. You may be, the Public Safety and Justice Committee may reach out to you for further discussion. We really do want your input for shaping this chapter and for the report as a whole. So I do, and the committee and the council as a whole really does appreciate your insights and your public comment. So continue to reach out to us through the website, or you already have previously existing relationships. Please reach out to the folks on the council that you know. This is a not just an expert or a top-down initiative, but we really do want the voices of folks, everyday people, and people who've particularly been impacted by what we're calling the justice system to participate in this endeavor. So please be on the lookout for this ongoing dialogue. And before I let you all go and give you back some time, I do want to have you all put on your calendars on Juneteenth, Wednesday, June 19th of this year. The council will have its first in-person event in Newark at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. The event will be free and open to the public. It's going to be moderated by the historian and journalist Jelani Cobb. Professor Mohammed will be there, as well as Dean Tajania Henderson, as well as members of the council to talk about the work to date. And this event will also be live streamed as well. So for those of you who can't make it to Newark that night, please watch the event virtually online. And, I just want to say thank you all for taking the time out of your evening today to participate in this very engaging discussion. And we'll see you next time. And I hope you all have a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.